Welcome to Folk and Fairy Tales. I'm your host, Dark, and tonight we will be going to Africa with African myths and legends, brought to us by Kathleen Arnott. The story for tonight is that of the man who learned the language of the animals. Ohia was a very unlucky man. Everything he did went wrong. When he sowed corn, the seed would be eaten up by birds or carried off by ants. If he planted cassava, monkeys would come and dig it up. If he bought a goat, it would soon die. And if he tried to keep hens, they would lay their eggs in the forest where he could not find them. Now, Ohia had a wife called Arahu. But as she was equally unlucky in all that she undertook, they were soon so poor they scarcely had anything left to eat, and only one threadbare cloth to wear. One evening, when they had eaten a very meager supper, they sat outside their hut and discussed their future. "Surely there is something we can do to get money," said Arihu mournfully. "If I do not buy a new cloth soon, this one will fall to pieces, and then I shall be ashamed to go into the village and will have to stay all day in our hut." Must be a horrible hut. Ohia sat dejectedly on a big log, holding his head with his hands. "Yes, we must think of something," he replied. "I never remember feeling so hungry as I do tonight. And that was the last of our yams. We've just eaten, so there will be nothing at all to eat tomorrow, unless our friends take pity on us." He thought hard, and his wife sighed deeply, while the owls in the forest behind the village hooted mournfully in the dark night. At last, Ohia had an idea. "I know what I can do," he suddenly exclaimed, looking almost cheerful again. "I will go to that rich farmer who lives on the other side of the hill and ask him if I may cut down some of his palm trees for him. He has so many that I'm sure he will agree. Then I will collect the sap from the trees for palm wine, and you, my wife, can take the wine to market and sell it." "I would willingly do that," said the wife, and she closed her eyes, imagining how she would spend the money and deciding on the color of the new cloth that she would buy. The next day, Ohia rose very early and went to call on the rich farmer. He proved to be a very reasonable man. The next day, Ohia rose very early and went to call on the rich farmer. He proved to be a very reasonable man, and even lent Ohia some earthenware pots in which to collect his sap, only making him promise to divide any money he earned between the two of them, since they were not Ohia's trees. Ohia was delighted and set to work with a will, cutting down 7 big palm trees. It was hard labor, especially for a man with an empty stomach, but at last it was finished, and he was able to make a cut in each tree, underneath which he put a pot in which to collect the sap. That night, Ohia and his wife lay awake several hours, discussing what they would do when they had sold the palm wine and had all the money in their hands at last. And long before daybreak, Ohio went with a lighted torch to see how much palm wine he had collected in his pots. He hoped to bring it home for his wife to take to market that very day. When he reached the first tree, he was disappointed to find that something had knocked over the pot and broken it into figments, spilling all the sap. But he did not think much about it, as he knew he had 6 more trees waiting for him further on. Alas, the second pot had been broken too, and the third, and the fourth. And before he reached the 7th pot, he had already guessed that they would all be shattered to pieces, as indeed they were. He hurried back to his wife, almost in tears at the misfortune that had befallen them. "Alas," he cried, "I knew it would be no good. Everything I attempt is doomed to fail. I may as well lie down and die." "Nonsense," said his wife briskly. "You must not give in. I expect it was the thief who stole the wine and then broke the pots to make it look as though some wild animal had kicked them over." "Yes, you are probably right," replied her husband. "I will try again." So he borrowed some more pots from his friends, for he had no money to which buy any in the market, and placed them carefully beneath each tree, so that the sap from the cut he had made would run exactly into each pot. But the next morning he was in despair again when he discovered that the same thing had happened, and all the pots were broken. He was certain that it was the work of a thief, so he said to his wife, "Tonight I will set some more pots in place, but I will not be such a fool as to leave them unguarded. I will hide nearby and watch for the thief, and when I have caught him, I will make him pay for his wickedness." Somehow, Ohio and his wife had managed to borrow a few more pots from their long-suffering friends, and when he had put them in the right position to catch the sap, he hid behind a large tree trunk and waited. For a long time, nothing happened, and Ohio got cramped and cold as he sat silent and motionless, not even daring to slap at the mosquitoes which bit into his face, in case he warned the thief. Then, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, he saw a dark shape moving towards the nearest palm tree and heard the sound of a breaking pot. With a mighty leap, Ohio landed beside the deer and reached out a hand to seize it. Creeping soundlessly up to the figure, he was amazed to find a full-grown deer carrying a large pot of its own, into which it emptied Ohio's sap and then broke Ohio's pot. With a mighty leap, Ohio leapt and landed beside the deer and reached out a hand to seize it. But the animal was too quick for him, and leaving its own large pot on the ground, it ran away swiftly into the forest. Ohio was determined not to lose sight of it, and his anger added speed to his strides, so he chased after the animal for many miles. At last, the sun began to rise, but Ohio had not yet caught up with the deer, and it was not until some hours later that they reached the bottom of a steep hill, up which the animal rose with faltering steps. Ohio was almost exhausted too, but climbed slowly upwards until he suddenly discovered himself in the middle of a large assembly of animals grouped around a regal-looking leopard, who was obviously their king. The deer lay panting at the king's feet and told his story, while all the animals turned and fixed their eyes on Ohio, who then begged the leopard to hear his side of the tale. So, beginning with the story of his continuous ill luck, Ohio explained why he had chased the deer into the leopard's kingdom and begged him to excuse his intrusion into the animal land. The leopard king listened attentively and then said, "We all agree that it is deer who was doing wrong, not you, O man. I had given the deer plenty of money to buy palm wine for me, but he decided it would be cheaper to steal yours. We will therefore present you with a gift in exchange for the wine the deer has stolen and the pots which he has broken. From now onwards, you will have the power to understand the speech of all animals. And in time, this will make you a rich man." Ohio could not see how such a gift would bring him wealth, but he bowed to the king and thanked him politely. "One thing you must remember, however," said the king, "you must never tell anyone about your wonderful gift. If you do, you will die. You will die at once." Ohio thanked him again and promised never to speak about the gift to anyone, and then he slowly climbed down the hill to begin his long journey home. Arawu was delighted to see him and plied him with questions, but all he would tell her was that he had caught the deer breaking his pots, and he had chased after it without catching it. The next evening he had one last attempt to get sap from the palm trees, for not all the pots had been broken by the deer. How delighted the poor man was to find his jars overflowing with sap, which his wife quickly took to the market and sold for a good price. One morning, while he was bathing in a nearby pool, Ohio heard a chicken talking to her young ones.
"Quack, look at that stupid man in the river," she clucked. "How very unpleasant it must be to have all the water over one's body, Squawk. But it's quite obvious he's a fool, because he doesn't even know there are 3 jars of gold buried beneath his house. I uncovered them myself while I was scratching for food. Quack. But since I don't like the man, I covered them up again before he saw them."
Ohio could scarcely believe his ears, but went on washing himself as though he heard nothing. Later in the day, when the rest of the village was sleeping in the heat of the afternoon, Ohio dug in his garden and soon found the 3 jars of gold. There was enough money to keep him in comfort for the rest of his life. But he had to hide it away under the floor of his house, since he could not tell his wife how he had known where to dig. Now, life became very pleasant for Ohio and Uriah, for they were the richest couple in the village. Uriah was a kind woman and helped any poor people who came to her in trouble. But Ohio wanted to become even more respected, and so he decided to buy a second wife. Oh, Lord. The foolish man chose a woman whose good looks made him blind to her jealous nature, and as soon as he brought her into her home, trouble began. The new wife could not bear to see Ohio and Uriah together, and if they spoke or laughed when she was near, she flew into a rage and accused them of ridiculing her. She crept around the compound, listening to all they said, always ready to complain or to weep if she heard so much as a sentence pass their lips. Poor Ohio! He tried very hard to keep the peace, but all in vain. Then, one evening, Ohio was sitting outside his house with Uriah beside him, neither daring to speak, since the new wife was so close at hand. Uriah was tired and gently dozing when Ohio heard two little mice talking in the roof above his head.
As soon as these people have gone inside to sleep,
squeaked a mouse,
we will raid their cabinets. Oh yes,
piped the other mouse.
I've just been looking into it, and they have some lovely bean cakes that I can't wait to get my teeth into.
Ohio laughed out loud, for there were other people near him. Ohio laughed out loud. Ohio laughed out loud, forgetting that there were other people near him. Ohio woke with a start, but the new wife rushed out of the next hut, exclaiming, "There you go again, poking fun at me! What were the two of you laughing at?" Orihu insisted that she had been asleep, and Ohio exclaimed that it had just been a foolish thought that had come to him, but the woman would not believe them. If you were really laughing at a mere foolish thought, you would tell me at once what it was, she complained. And for the rest of the evening and all the following day, she worried and nagged at him to tell her the joke. Finally, in desperation, she decided to go to the chief and lodge a complaint against her husband. Now, the chief was a friend of Ohio, and when he heard the angry tale of this new wife, he sent for Ohio, meaning to help him. Surely it would be better to tell this new wife of yours what you were laughing at, than to have all your days and nights be miserable by her moaning, the chief said to him. Ohio was in a fix, for he respected the chief, and was indeed tired of the way his new wife had spoiled his newfound bliss. For some moments he sat, trying to decide on the best course to take, and at last he resigned himself to death, since whoa, damn. And at last he resigned himself to death, since he would have to tell his long-kept secret. He called all his friends and relatives to a big feast, during which he stood up and announced that he bequeathed all his gold to Orihu and all his property to his son. Then he bowed to the chief, bade him goodbye, and told the assembled company the story of his meeting with the Leopard King and the gift which he had given him. He had only time to tell them why he had laughed that evening on hearing the mice speak when he fell dead, just as the Leopard King had warned would befall him. And then the feast was turned into a funeral, and all his friends wept and mourned as they buried poor Ohio. So angry were they with his new wife for being the curse of his death, that they seized her and killed her and burned her body outside the village. Her ashes were scattered by the wind over all the earth, and wherever a speck of her dust fell, jealousy and selfishness takes root. And this was the beginning of evil in the world, where only kindness and unselfishness had existed before. And that is the story of of the man who learned the language of the animals. Fellow dreamers, fellow sleepers, it is late, and time to sleep. Good night, and I'll see you tomorrow. Until then. Oh, but a moment. Before I go, there has been some serious abuse to a friend of mine you all might know, the like button. And I just feel that the time has come to really give them a treat. So if you would, do take the like button out for a good time. Shopping, maybe to Target, some good dinner, an Asian or Italian restaurant, massage. After the night is done, while the like button sleeps, go and write them a bunch of really cute little notes and put it in their car with some flowers and stuff. Treat the like button right, and it will treat you the same. On that, good night, and tomorrow again.